It all began on an ordinary flight bound from New York to Denver. The passengers boarded just like they always do, some tired, some excited, some nervous. Among them was a man sitting quietly in row 12. His name was Michael, a single dad traveling with his 7-year-old daughter, Emily. To the world, he looked like any other passenger, a bit weary, carrying more bags than most and doing his best to keep his little girl entertained. But behind those tired eyes was a story of resilience. Michael had lost his wife 3 years ago in a car accident. Since then, he had taken on both roles, mother and father, doing his best to raise Emily with love, patience, and strength. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't extraordinary in the eyes of the world. But to Emily, he was everything. He worked 2 jobs, saved carefully, and promised her that once in a while they'd go on little adventures. This flight was the start of one of those adventures, a short vacation, just father and daughter away from the stress of daily life. As the flight took off, Emily was pressed against the window, her small face glowing with excitement as the city lights disappeared beneath the clouds. Michael, exhausted from long shifts and late nights packing, finally allowed himself to close his eyes. He drifted off, thinking this would be a rare moment of peace. But somewhere over the Midwest, that peace was shattered. The calm voice of the flight attendant suddenly came over the intercom, but this time there was a noticeable edge in her tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? If there is a licensed pilot on board, could you please make yourself known to the crew immediately?" A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried glances. Murmurs rippled through the rows. Why would they be asking that? Was something wrong with the flight crew? Emily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, wake up," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Michael opened his eyes, still groggy, but quickly alert when he saw the unease on the faces around him. The announcement came again, this time more urgent. "This is Captain Lawson speaking. We are experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. If there is a certified pilot among our passengers, please come forward." Gasps filled the cabin. Some passengers covered their mouths. Others instinctively tightened their seatbelts. Michael sat up straight, his heart pounding. You see, before life had thrown him into the role of single father, Michael had lived another life entirely. He had once been a commercial pilot himself. Flying had been his passion, his dream since childhood. He had spent years in the cockpit, soaring through the skies. But when his wife died, he gave it all up. He couldn't manage the long hours away from Emily. He traded in the sky for stability, and the uniform for late-night shifts at the mechanic's garage. He hadn't flown in years, and he thought that chapter of his life was closed forever. But Vade had other plans. Michael froze for a moment, torn between disbelief and fear. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't prepared. And most of all, he hadn't touched an aircraft in almost 7 years. Doubts flooded his mind. Could he still do it? Was he capable? Then he looked at Emily. Her little hand was clutching his arm, her eyes searching his. "Daddy, you can help them, right?" she asked, her voice trembling but filled with trust. That was all it took. Michael stood, his legs shaky but determined. The flight attendants noticed immediately. Relief flashed across their faces when he said quietly, "I'm a licensed pilot. Or at least I was." Within moments, he was escorted to the front. The passengers whispered as he walked past, some praying, some simply staring in shock. For them, this stranger in row 12 had suddenly become their only hope. When Michael stepped into the cockpit, he was greeted with a sight that made his heart race. The co-pilot had collapsed unconscious, his headset slipping from his ears. The captain, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Lawson, was still at the controls, her face pale and beads of sweat forming on her forehead. She was clearly struggling, trying to keep the plane steady while calling out for help. Her eyes locked on Michael. "Are you the pilot?" she asked, her voice tight. "I used to fly commercial," Michael admitted. "It's been years. That's good enough," she said firmly. "I need you now." Michael slid into the co-pilot's seat, his hands instinctively reaching for the controls. For a moment, muscle memory took over, the years of training, and countless flights flooding back, the hum of the engines, the flicker of the instruments. It was all familiar, like a part of him he thought he'd lost forever. Captain Lawson quickly briefed him on their situation. They were cruising at 35,000 FT, but they needed to make an emergency landing. With one pilot down, she couldn't manage alone. And if something happened to her, the plane full of passengers, over 200 souls, would be in danger. Michael nodded, his doubts pushed aside. "Let's do this," he said. Together, they worked in sync. The cockpit came alive with activity as they coordinated with air traffic control. Michael's voice was steady as he read out instruments and assisted with navigation. It was as though he had never left the skies. Captain Lawson stole a glance at him, silently grateful for his calm presence. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the passengers sat in tense silence. Emily clutched her stuffed bunny, whispering prayers under her breath. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew her daddy was up there helping. She believed in him completely. As the minutes ticked by, turbulence shook the plane. A few passengers began to cry softly while others held hands. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, doing their best to keep everyone calm, though fear lingered in their eyes too. Then came the moment of truth. They were approaching the nearest airport, but the weather had turned rough. Heavy crosswinds, rain streaking across the windshield, visibility dropping. It was the kind of landing that tested even the most experienced pilots. Michael gripped the controls, his knuckles white, his heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. This wasn't about him. It was about Emily, about every person on board. He couldn't let fear win. Captain Lawson's voice was calm, guiding, but Michael could sense the strain in her tone. "You've got this," she told him. "Just trust your training." As the runway lights appeared faintly through the rain, Michael felt a surge of determination. He adjusted the flaps, steadied the descent, and with Captain Lawson's assistance guided the massive aircraft toward the ground. The engines roared, the wings shuddered, and every passenger held their breath. Finally, impact. The wheels screeched against the wet runway, sending vibrations through the entire cabin. For a terrifying second, the plane skidded, fighting against the crosswind. Michael held firm, making the tiny corrections that would mean the difference between disaster and safety. And then miraculously, the aircraft straightened, slowing down until it came to a smooth stop on the tarmac. The cabin erupted. Applause, cheers, sobs of relief. Strangers hugged each other. Passengers wept openly. Emily jumped up in her seat, clapping with all her might. "That's my daddy," she shouted proudly, her little voice carrying through the chaos. Michael sat back in the cockpit, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. For the first time in years, he felt the rush of being a pilot again, not for himself, but for the lives he had just saved. Captain Lawson placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice filled with gratitude. "You just saved over 200 lives. Don't ever doubt yourself again." When Michael returned to the cabin, the passengers gave him a standing ovation. Some reached out to shake his hand. Others simply whispered, "Thank you," through tears. But for him, the only face that mattered was Emily's. She threw her arms around him, whispering, "I knew you could do it, Daddy." Later, as the paramedics attended to the unconscious co-pilot, the airline representatives tried to usher Michael into the spotlight, praising him as a hero, but he only shook his head. "I'm not a hero," he said softly. "I just did what needed to be done." Yet in that moment, he had become so much more than just a tired single father in row 12. He had become a symbol of courage, of second chances, and of the extraordinary strength that lies within ordinary people. And perhaps most importantly, he showed his daughter that even when life grounds you, the skies may one day call you back when you're needed most. This story reminds us all that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they sit quietly among us, carrying burdens we cannot see until the moment comes when their strength is revealed. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story. If you believe in the power of courage, faith, and love,